Shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced a historic increase in military spending. It included a one-time sum of 100 billion euros to swiftly upgrade the armed forces and a pledge to spend at least 2% of Germany's economic output on defense every year. So what exactly is Germany planning to buy with these billions? Here's a closer look.
These US-built aircraft are top of the Bundeswehr shopping list. The F-35 can carry all types of weapons. Its design and coating make it difficult for radar to detect. With Germany's current fleet of fighter jets aging fast, an upgrade is long overdue.
The F-35
is the most modern combat aircraft in the world, and many of our partners, especially here in Europe, have also chosen it. Together with our partners in the alliance, we'll strengthen our ability to secure NATO airspace, credibly deter, and also, if need be, defend ourselves.
The deal marks a shift in policy. Instead of pursuing its own development projects, the Bundeswehr is buying what's on the market. Even though critics say it increases Germany's dependency on the US, the war in Ukraine has made military modernization even more urgent. When it comes to air defense, the German armed forces are now also considering purchasing an Israeli anti-missile shield. The system is called Arrow 3 and complements the so-called Iron Dome to protect Israel against rockets. It can shoot down long-range ballistic missiles and would be powerful enough to protect countries in Eastern Europe as well. That's something Germany so far has not been able to do, but might need to in the future.
We must all prepare ourselves for the fact that we have a neighbour who's currently prepared to use force to assert his interests. And that's why we have to make ourselves strong together, so that that doesn't happen.
Also needed, new heavy-lift transport helicopters to replace the old Sikorsky CH-53s, a system developed in the 1960s. The list of what the Bundeswehr needs to bring it into the 21st century is a long one. From Navy ships and tanks to radio equipment and ammunition. Easing the backlog caused by decades of chronic underfunding will likely take years.
DW Chief International Editor Richard Walker joins me now in studio to discuss this further. Richard, the German Defense Minister has been in Washington. Talk to us about the purpose of her visit.
Yeah, that's right. So that's the first visit since taking office for Christine Lambrecht, who's the new Minister of Defense. She hasn't worked in this field before, and all of a sudden she's in the middle of this dramatic development in Germany's security policy and finding things to spend this 100 billion euros on. So she'll be meeting, or she has met her US counterpart, Lloyd Austin, the US Secretary of Defense, other meetings in Washington. And this would have been a routine visit, you know, for a new Minister of Defense in Germany, of course, heading to consult with US allies. But this war has, of course, scrambled everything. So her main mission there is really to explain this new defense policy that Germany has come up with and all of this spending and some of the things that they will be spending that money on.
Talk to us a little bit about the international criticism that Germany has faced in recent years over its approach to defense. We know that the Chancellor has said there's going to be a change coming. Is that actually happening, or is it just on paper, and how is that going right now?
Well, yeah, it was really interesting. So Christine Lambrecht took part in a think tank event while she was in Washington with the Atlantic Council. So that's one of the DC think tanks that's attached, that's very, very closely linked to NATO. And it's really interesting to see the beginning of that. She was introduced by General Jim Jones, who was the former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. He was a former National Security Advisor in Washington. A real establishment military and defense figure in the US. And he referred to this investment and he said on that, congratulations. So this being kind of treated as like almost like a birthday moment that Germany is sort of seeing the light about defense and making up for these shortfalls of investment over the years. And in Lambrecht's message, it was really interesting to follow what she was saying. She was absolutely effusive in her praise for Joe Biden and the leadership that he's shown in this crisis. And her message essentially was, what we're doing here in Germany, this is for real. We are really making this big change. That anybody who's sceptical about it, don't be sceptical. We're going to deliver on this. Essentially, we see that America is back, as Joe Biden has said many times, and we are with you. Germany is with you. Now, I think many observers are still wary to some extent. They're wondering whether Germany will always revert back to this more cautious approach. But Christine Lambrecht insisting, for instance, that Germany has become the second biggest supplier of weapons to Ukraine after the United States. So I think one quote that I would pick out to close this late, she said, Germany has arrived in this new reality and it's facing up to the consequences.
DW Chief International Editor Richard Walker. Thank you very much, Richard. Now, some breaking news here in Germany. The government has just announced it's activating its early warning plan in anticipation of possible shortages of gas supplies from Russia. Economy Minister Robert Habeck stressed that there are currently no shortages, but that the government would be establishing a crisis team to monitor the situation more closely. The move follows Russia's demand for gas payments in rubles, which Germany and other Western nations have rejected. For more, I'm joined now by our political correspondent, Jared Reed. Jared, what more can you tell us about this development this hour?
Hi, Abby. Well, the background to all this is a demand from Vladimir Putin that countries like Germany pay for gas in rubles. And earlier this week, we had the G7, which is led by Germany at the moment, reject this demand. And so Moscow has put this into a bill requiring countries to essentially pay for energy in rubles, which the G7, as I said, says it will not do. So this has caused Robert Habeck to set up a crisis team and activate this early warning level that you just mentioned, which is where we are right now. That means a crisis team will be holding daily meetings where they'll have gas providers, gas service providers, representatives of the regions. They'll be monitoring the situation really closely, seeing how they can best work together. So that's where we are today. The next two levels are the alarm level and the emergency level. And under EU law, an early warning level, what we have now, can be issued if you have concrete, serious and reliable evidence that there could be an event which could potentially threaten supply. And clearly Germany believes that this bill that is being proposed by Russia does constitute that. As you mentioned, at the moment, Robert Habeck says there is no cause really for concern to shortage for users or industry. It just means that they've kind of institutionalized a situation of monitoring gas supply in kind of a formal sense. We have to keep in mind that countries like Germany that are currently trying to scale back dependence on Russia for energy, but still are very reliant on Moscow, they need to kind of formalize these processes to see how they could potentially react if and when Russia might decide to stop supplying.
DW political correspondent Jared Reed. Thanks, Jared.